Hello, good evening. Welcome back. I'm Reverend Philip Ong, your co-student in God's Word through Salva Vida Ministries. We are now in a new series called Fulfillment of the Gospel of Christ to the Jew first and then to the Gentiles. Now this topic is very important. Before, the gospel for me is so broad, it's so short. Actually, it's my understanding before about the gospel is only gospel tract. You share it for a few minutes and then it's over. But now, after my training in the seminary, in the Biblical Seminar of the Philippines, I understand now that the gospel is a broad topic as what we have discussed last week. The gospel of God, the gospel of Christ, the gospel of His Son, the gospel of peace, the gospel of righteousness, all these are included in the word gospel. That's why there are 4 gospels, remember, in the New Testament. And so as we continue for tonight, Romans 1:16 says, the Apostle Paul, I quote, "For I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek or Gentiles." So now, let's go back to a new topic called, what is the law of Christ? If the gospel is of Christ, of His Son, of God, then it just simply means the gospel can mean also the law of Christ. Now, as we look at Galatians chapter 6 verse 2, the phrase the law of Christ is found there. When Paul declares, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ or the gospel of Christ. In the context, Paul is describing the willingness of the disciples must have to restore one another who is overtaken by sin, according to verse 1. To do so and bear such a burden for a brother or sister fulfills or obeys the command or the law given by Christ. So through the New Testament, this new body of law is shown to be the universally binding standard for men and women in this age, the Messianic age. All the way back in the book of Genesis, it was prophesied that a descendant of Judah would be a lawgiver according to Genesis 49 verse 10. Now this did not refer to Moses because Moses was from the tribe of Levi, 1 Chronicles 23:14. Now this was rather a messianic prophecy. The Christ would bring a new law, the New Testament, as what we call them today, makes it clear that in the coming of Jesus, He brought with Him a new standard to which mankind is not held accountable. This is referred to in a number of different ways. It is, according to Jeremiah 31:31. Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah, the 12 tribes. Now Jeremiah 31:32, not like the covenant that I made with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt. That is the old covenant, the Old Testament of the law of Moses. My covenant that they broke, that I was their husband, declares the Lord. Jeremiah 31:33, for this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my law within them. I will write it on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Jeremiah 31:34, and no longer shall each one teach his neighbor and each his brother, saying, know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. For I will forgive the iniquity, and I will remember the sin no more. The new covenant, according to Jeremiah 31:31, prophesied the coming of new covenant, which will bring forgiveness. 31:34b, which will all under the covenant would know the Lord. Now 31:34a says this would involve the law within the hearts and minds of those considered His people. verse 33, but would not be like the covenant given to Israel in 32, or verse 32. On the night of Jesus' betrayal, remember, he instituted the Lord's Supper as the new covenant in my blood, according to Luke 22:20. This is the fulfillment of Jeremiah's prophecy, and likewise the cup after they had eaten, saying, this cup that is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood, as Jesus said. So Paul described those who taught the message of Jesus as the ministers of the new covenant, contrasting the Mosaic law or the Mosaic age according to Moses, which he called the letter, which kills, as opposed to the revelation of the Spirit in the new covenant, which he said gives life. 2 Corinthians 3:6, who has made us sufficient to be ministers of a new covenant. So the Apostle Paul says, not of the letter, but of the Spirit. For the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life. That's cross-references to Hebrew writer calls Jesus the mediator of the new covenant. Hebrews 9:15 says, therefore, he is the mediator of the new covenant, so that those who are called may receive the promised eternal inheritance, since a death has occurred that redeems them from the transgression committed under the first covenant. So the old covenant and now the new covenant. Hebrews 12:24 says, and to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. He even quotes the prophecy of Jeremiah 31:31 in Hebrews chapter 8, verse 8, for he finds fault with them when he says, behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will establish a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. This is the fulfillment. The book of Hebrews is the fulfillment of what has been prophesied in the book of Jeremiah. So going on to compare the Mosaic law and the covenant of Christ, or the Messianic law, declaring in that he says, a new covenant, he has made the first obsolete. Hebrews 8:13 says, in speaking of a new covenant, God makes the first one obsolete, and what is becoming obsolete and growing old is ready to vanish away. This makes it clear that the new covenant is to serve as a new body of law for this age, this Messianic age, that supplants and replaces the Mosaic law. So the Messianic law changed to Mosaic law. So, before we end, that's the good news. That's the gospel of the Messiah. So as we always say, see you next week, as we say in Salva Vida Ministries, bringing hopes in times of trouble and witnessing God's saving grace. Good night.
When the waves of life pull you down and your heart is lost and bound,